Hello everybody, this is Dr. Ariella trying again to do this video. Oh my goodness. Most of the time these work well, sometimes they don't work so well. Alright, chapter 13 on conflict and peacemaking, or peacemaking and conflict. Does it matter which one we use first? There's a question for you. Okay, so I want to discuss a few things. One of them is the definition of conflict. I think it's really valuable when we're reading, things like this kind of definition, that we really reflect on the words that are used in the definition, because they can be very revealing. For example, the definition of conflict is a perceived incompatibility of actions or goals. That important word, perceived. I just love that. Thinking about what that word means, and reflecting on Meyer's discussions in different places in his text about the human predilection or tendency to misperceive, and how that affects us in so many different ways. And so here we are talking about a perception, or perhaps often, most of the time, some of the time, I don't really know, misperceptions of commonality. So I think it's really important, when we think about what conflict is and how often it could stem from a misperception, because we often have misperceptions of people and situations, as Myers has been discussing throughout this text. He talks about the prisoner's dilemma, and the laboratory version of the prisoner's dilemma, and the tragedy of commons. Again, I mentioned this before, but if you can get your hands on the BBC's Horizons episodes, really fascinating, because they talk about these experiments, the prisoner's dilemma, the laboratory version of it, and the tragedy of the commons. And I learned about the history of the tragedy of the commons, and how it's kind of been generalized to other kinds of similar situations. But the history of the tragedy of commons demonstrates how kind of individual cultures or societies kind of clash with attempts to be communal, in a way, as a short version of describing the tragedy of the commons, and how that also affects people in other ways. On page 472, he mentions regulation and diminishing personal freedom. And I thought this is really fascinating, because as a libertarian, I'm very interested in this topic. I am concerned about the laws that are continuing to be passed, especially after 9/11, and the kinds of what I see as infringements on our civil liberties. So he's suggesting that, there's some lots of freedom, like a lot of people do, lots of freedom, but it's for the common good. Is it? I have my doubts, and it's something that I talk with people about. But I thought it was fascinating that he included that in this text. On page 476, he mentions something that comes up a lot in my interactions with students as well as with others, but talking about fairness and justice. And so I'll hear people say, or they'll write about something being unfair, and so I ask the questions, as he does here, well, what is fair? Who determines what's fair? How do you determine what's fair? It's just this really big, vague kind of question. And so he talks about one way of determining equitability, but it's just one way. Is it the best way? I don't know. So, this concept of fair, we need to, really look at what that means, and how we would actually figure out what's fair, because whoever's getting the short end of the stick isn't going to think it's fair, but somebody else will. So it's a really interesting sociological and psychological question about fairness, as well as political. And he asked the question, on what basis should rewards be distributed? So again, really important question, and not something that our society has really dealt with well, I think. Something for you to think about. Maybe you think it has, I don't know. He again goes into misperceptions, and how important, noting those are, as well as negative mirror image perceptions, and how we tend to project our own emotions, feelings, thoughts on others. and assume that they're thinking what they're thinking. On page 480, he talks about simplistic thinking, and he mentions in that first paragraph about how even the mere expectation of conflict can serve to freeze thinking and impede creative problem solving. Wow, I found this to be so true. I have had this experience so many times. You know, we all have our buttons, as they call them, and you know, this is one of mine. If there's a potential for conflict, and you know, someone's upset with me, then that's kind of triggers my button, and I find that I don't sometimes engage in you know, creative problem solving at that point until I can figure out my emotional status. So I thought that was very interesting for me, and maybe you will find it relevant to your life somewhere as well. On page 42 in that research close-up, he again mentions that concept of empathy and how important it is, according to one researcher, for this concept of war and how that happens. The desegregation and racial attitudes I thought was really fascinating, and the box on page 495 about Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey I thought was really great. Here is this sociologist who what happened to also be a mayor's a committee chairman on a mayor's committee, who proposed to Branch Rickey to bring in Jackie Robinson, and then Branch Rickey got some advice about how to do that well. And so I thought that was just really awesome, because this sociologist, I'm assuming there are others involved too, but he had a major influence about racial attitudes and prejudice for our entire country. I just think that's so awesome. I love that. Let's see. Oh, on page 499, Myers has a table about how to fight constructively. If you're interested in this topic and want to learn another way of communicating, it's not how to fight fair, but it's called nonviolent communication. I've taken a couple of workshops or seminars or whatever you want to call it. It was developed by Marshall Rosenberg, nonviolent communication. It's also called compassionate communication. But he has 4 steps that he developed in how to talk to people, you know, about your emotional challenges or situations or whatever. And I found it to be pretty beneficial when I remember to use it. That's one of the challenges. But it's great if you have a partner that you can practice with. So if you're interested in another way of communicating that might work for you, check it out. Nonviolent communication. There are workshops and seminars about it pretty much all over the country. I mean, they even have them here in Hawaii, and there aren't a whole lot of things that come to Hawaii like that. Finally, on page 505, he again mentions how societies are accepting, that's a word for debate, but accepting some adjustments to individual rights to protect, again, word for debate, the public good. So I thought it was interesting that he mentions this at least twice in this chapter alone about doing something for the common good, which is limiting individual freedom. And you know, it's an interesting topic to me. You know, I have my concerns about it, and it's just something for you to reflect on. Okay, so thank you for your time and attention. I will sign off for now. See you in cyberspace.